9 minutes. One calm man. No threats. No theatrics. And by the time he walked away from that lectern, 3 commodity markets had halted trading. The White House Situation Room had gone live, and a phrase nobody had heard before, Arctic clause, was trending in over 40 countries. What you are about to hear is the most precisely engineered economic counterstrike in modern diplomatic history, and almost no one saw it coming. 3 days before that video dropped, the White House quietly released something called the North American Energy Security Framework. It was packaged as a routine modernization, a way to streamline energy commerce, cut red tape, and update outdated billing infrastructure between the US, Canada, and Mexico. Cable networks gave it 2 minutes of airtime before moving on to the next story. But inside the Bank of Canada, the Prime Minister's office, and Canada's Ministry of Finance, a very different reading was circulating immediately. Because buried inside that executive order was a single mechanism that changed everything. Every Canadian energy shipment, oil, gas, uranium, hydroelectricity, would now be required to route through one newly created clearing body, one body, managed exclusively by the U.S. Treasury, with no requirement for court approval before it could delay or halt a payment. Canada ships over $170 billion in energy to the United States every year. That revenue funds provincial governments, public infrastructure, and millions of retirement accounts across the country. In a single stroke, Washington had quietly acquired the ability to freeze all of it at any moment without a single judicial check standing in the way. If you want to understand how a middle power defeats a superpower without firing a single shot, stay with me, because what happened next will change how you think about economic warfare forever. Here is a detail the mainstream coverage almost entirely missed. Mark Carney reviewed the complete text of that executive order less than 40 minutes after it was published. Within that same window, he placed 3 phone calls. The first to the governor of the Bank of Canada, the second to the head of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, the third to a senior official believed to be connected to the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. By that evening, a counterplan was already in motion, and for the next 48 hours, Canada said almost nothing in public. The official statement was measured, diplomatic, and carefully worded. Analysts called it weak. Some said Canada was backing down. They were wrong. If this is new to you, hit subscribe. We cover the stories that don't make the front page, but absolutely should. While Washington was still congratulating itself, something was quietly being assembled that the American media had almost no framework to understand. Because the real countermove wasn't about oil, it wasn't about gas. It was about uranium, and it was one of the most surgically targeted economic maneuvers ever executed by a mid-sized country against a superpower. Here is why uranium matters more than almost any resource in this story. Canada is the world's second largest uranium producer. Its output fuels approximately 31% of all civilian nuclear reactors in the United States. Those reactors generate roughly 20% of all American electricity. And here is the part that makes this genuinely alarming. You cannot swap uranium suppliers the way you change a gas station. Reactors are precisely engineered to specific fuel specifications under long-term contracts. Finding and qualifying a new supplier can take 2 full years. There is no emergency workaround. There is no fast substitute. Washington had handed Canada a key, and Canada had just decided to use it. Keep watching, because what happened at 6 a.m. on the morning of the speech is the part that made markets freeze. At precisely 6 a.m. Eastern, 3 coordinated actions were triggered across Canadian institutions simultaneously. First, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission issued a directive pausing all uranium export permits, citing a regulatory review of safety and sovereignty compliance. The language was entirely technical. The United States was never mentioned by name. Under existing Canadian law, that review can lawfully last up to 180 days. Second, Cameco Corporation, the largest publicly listed uranium mining company in the Western world, formally invoked force majeure on its American supply agreements, citing the regulatory pause as an uncontrollable external event. Third, Canada's Ministry of Natural Resources introduced enhanced verification requirements on rare earth shipments, materials essential to U.S. military systems, semiconductor manufacturing, and electric vehicle production, effectively delaying deliveries for a minimum of 90 days. None of these actions constituted sanctions. None violated a single trade agreement. None named the United States directly. Each was, on its own, a perfectly routine regulatory procedure. Together, they formed one of the most precisely calibrated economic interventions in recent history. And Washington didn't fully grasp what had just happened until it was already irreversible. At 9:41 a.m. Eastern, Mark Carney stepped in front of a camera, simple blue background, no notes, no teleprompter visible, no raised voice. He spoke the way a senior central banker explains a complex mechanism to a room full of professionals who already understand the stakes. He walked through the clearing body clause by clause. He explained in the precise technical language of someone who spent decades inside the global financial architecture exactly what it meant for Canadian sovereignty. Then he paused and said the line that is now being quoted in financial briefings from Tokyo to Frankfurt. No sovereign nation can accept such conditions, and Canada does not. He described Canada's regulatory measures as routine reviews. He framed them entirely within Canada's legal rights. And then came the sentence that quietly rewired the global conversation. Canada, he said, stood ready to accelerate partnerships with nations that treated it as an equal. Partnerships settled outside existing payment infrastructure where appropriate. The implication landed like a depth charge. Uranium shipments weren't stopping. They were being redirected. France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, India, nations with large nuclear programs, capable of absorbing Canadian supply and increasingly motivated to settle trade outside the U.S. dollar system. The response was immediate and historic in scale. Uranium prices surged more than 40% within hours. Cameco shares spiked so sharply that exchanges suspended trading to prevent runaway volatility. American utility companies shed tens of billions in market value inside a single trading session. Rare earth commodity prices climbed across every major segment. But the most significant reaction came in the debt markets, and it moved quietly. U.S. Treasury yields climbed, not from mass selling, but from a more unsettling source, doubt. If the United States could unilaterally impose payment controls on its closest and most trusted ally, what did that mean for every other nation holding dollar-denominated assets? Central banks in multiple countries began making small but meaningful adjustments, trimming treasury positions, adding euros, increasing gold allocations. Gold hit new all-time records. The Swiss franc strengthened. The euro advanced. Even cryptocurrency inflows increased as some participants sought assets operating outside traditional government-controlled systems. The White House called it retaliation. Experts called it structurally rational. The Pentagon issued a separate release flagging national security concerns over the supply disruption, a visible sign of internal division within the administration itself. By evening, the European Commission had announced accelerated development of an alternative international payment system and invited Canada to join as a founding partner. Japan, the UK, South Korea, and Australia released parallel statements within hours. The message was unmistakable. The architecture of global trade was beginning to shift, and Canada had just become the unlikely catalyst. Tonight, 3 possible futures are taking shape. In the first, both sides step back. Diplomats negotiate. Some measures are rolled back. But the trust, once fractured, does not fully return. And the vulnerability Washington exposed in its own energy infrastructure cannot be unseen. In the second, positions harden. The trade conflict deepens. The restructuring of global supply chains and payment systems accelerates beyond what either side originally intended. In the third, and most consequential, what Canada did becomes a template. Other resource-rich nations watching closely begin to ask a question that has never been asked so loudly before. If Canada can do this, why can't we? That question may already have an answer, and it may be the most important economic story of the decade. 9 minutes of calm, precise, technically fluent speech moved commodity markets, rattled bond yields, and triggered a realignment in how nations think about payment systems and economic dependency. Not with aggression, not with threats, with the exact, deliberate language of someone who understood the system better than the people trying to use it as a weapon. What do you think happens next? Does Washington back down, or does this escalate further? Drop your prediction in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want to understand the economic stories that actually move the world before they hit the mainstream, subscribe right now. We break this kind of analysis every week, and you will not want to miss what's coming next.